ketogenic diet has become really popular over the last couple of years. Even athletes now are looking to use the ketogenic diet to see if they get some performance enhancement. Thankfully, now we have exogenous ketones, and although some of the early research looking at exogenous ketones for performance has been a bit up and down, a recent paper has looked at its potential benefit for post-exercise recovery. So today we're going to look at the benefits for using ketones, specifically exogenous ketones, for recovery and sports performance. Let's go. What's up, guys? My name is Richard and this is my channel Evolved Health, where my aim is to help people optimize their mental and physical performance utilizing ancestral wisdom and modern science. Wherever you're watching, make sure to hit the like and subscribe, and if you're on YouTube, hit the notification bell if you like the content so you don't miss out on any future videos. And today we're going to talk about a paper that recently came out in January 2021 from Mansor and Woo. And this is looking at ketones for post-exercise recovery, potential applications and mechanisms. So as I mentioned, the ketogenic diet has been looked at quite a bit now for its potential benefits in sports performance. And in the beginning, in the introduction, they kind of outlined some of the early literature looking at the potential impacts and benefits of ketosis and the ketogenic diet. And there are some really interesting benefits, which we'll go through. But the first thing to make mention of is the potential downside. So obviously, if you're on a ketogenic diet, that means that you're, by definition, not really consuming too many carbohydrates. And we know that carbohydrates are a really important ergogenic aid. So we need that glycogen, and we need that glycogen to be restored through glucose, where we're getting it from carbs. And one thing to mention here, as it's noted, is as per the Randall cycle, when we switch to a more fat-adapted position, we increase fatty acid oxidation, but therefore we decrease glucose metabolic pathways. So it's just the normal downregulation of those pathways. And therefore, the ketogenic diet upregulating fatty acid metabolism may inhibit glycolytic rates and subsequently the capacity to produce ATP dependent of oxygen availability. So obviously that's going to be really important for explosive and high intensity anaerobic activity. So there's a potential downside to being on the ketogenic diet. This is where the exogenous ketones come in. So we can still maintain a moderate or high carb diet, but get the benefits of the ketones. And this is really where things are shaping up in the sports performance world now to see if we get some benefit. So let's look at a couple of things where the ketogenic diet has had some improvement in performance. This is what they outline here. If you're familiar with Volek and Finney, they've done a lot of the early work looking at the ketogenic diet, especially in sports performance. Here we can see in animal studies that fat and keto-adapted mice on a ketogenic diet for 8 weeks showed enhanced performance without aggravated muscle injury while exerting potential protective benefit on organ injury caused by exercise. And this is kind of what we see across the board, where there seems to be some type of protective mechanism when in ketosis that is created through the endogenous production of ketones. The same group that did this study, Ma et al. In 2018, they also found in another study that an 8-week ketogenic diet not only enhanced exercise performance, but again, also attenuated muscle damage caused by excessive or exhaustive exercise. So there seems to be some protective mechanism that's occurring here, specifically for muscle tissue, which obviously for sports performance is going to be really important. One thing to mention, they do talk about in animal models and a couple other research models that they've looked at, there seems to be reduction potentially in modulating the IL-6, which is the inflammatory cytokine produced through exercise. The trick is here, if you follow a lot of the antioxidant research, we do want some level of inflammation because that inflammation is the hormetic response or the hormetic effect, which is going to help us improve and adapt to that stress. So a transient increase in IL-6 may not be so bad, and we have to be mindful not to modulate that too much. So we want some level of inflammation because that's going to form the signal for us to adapt and get stronger and get better and improve our endurance. One other thing they looked at is looking at the central aspects of fatigue. So we know that there's a couple of peripheral mechanisms and aspects of electrolytes or reduced calcium for muscle contraction. But one of the areas that has been getting a lot more research now is looking at the central aspects, so from the brain and central nervous system. One thing that may affect this is an increase in ammonia, so causing ammonemia, and what they found was that the introduction of ketones seems to attenuate how much ammonia is produced. And what they reckon is it's a little bit of decreasing the catabolism of certain amino acids, which inevitably end up increasing that ammonia. So there seems to be some protective mechanism there from the ketogenic diet, where again, we can improve that central aspect. And when we look at some of the studies they reviewed later on, we'll see that we do see improvements in overreaching symptoms, even from a central perspective. So I think there's still some areas that need to be worked out, but we can clearly see that there's benefits of a ketogenic diet for performance, but we just have to weigh out that benefit versus the carbohydrates. And that's what they outline here. So again, carbohydrates and proteins have long been established as important substrates to aid glycogen recovery and muscle repair after exhaustive exercise. Therefore, by restricting one or both of these food groups in recovery may be counterproductive, as we said at the beginning. So herein lies the benefit of exogenous ketones. So by using exogenous ketones, we're not inhibited by the ingestion of glucose nor insulin spike that follows, allowing additive effect of stacking multiple substrates to enhance the ergogenic effects, which is great. There's a couple different ones. Should note that a lot of this study is looking at the ketones. They're actually using ketone esters, and a lot of supplements you get now are actually ketone salts. So you have to keep that in mind. But we'll talk about key levels that you want to attain for blood ketone levels, regardless of what substrate you're using. So let's look at the research that they reviewed now, looking at the exogenous ketones. There were 3 main studies that they reviewed, because again, this is quite new research. There's not a ton of research out there right now. And even the power of each of these 3 studies is quite low, and they were all in healthy trained men. So we have to take that into consideration when we're looking at the totality of this research. We'll look at the Holdsworth, Van Doorn, and Poff papers here. So the first one with Holdsworth, they had subjects with a hyperglycemic clamp holding glucose at 10 millimolars. So that's important because this is supraphysiological levels of glucose, meaning that these are levels you wouldn't normally attain just through standard oral ingestion of carbohydrates. So we have to take that into consideration when looking at the effects of this study. And they probably need to do this, maybe replicate this study again with normal physiological doses of glucose. But they had high amounts of glucose followed by ketone monoester, and what they found was that they had an increase in glucose uptake by 32% in the intervention arm. So again, we talked about the importance of glycogen and glycogen resynthesis post-exercise. So if we can increase the uptake of glucose, we're going to get that glycogen in faster. So that's a huge benefit. And it seems to be modulated also by a role in increasing insulin. So they found insulin secretion increased, thereby increasing the activity of the GLUT4 transporter, which is the insulin-sensitive transporter, getting more glucose into the cell. So that's going to help rebuild that muscle glycogen, and they saw that muscle glycogen was 50% higher in the ketone group. So that's massive. Great improvement on that side. When we look at the Van Doorn study, they showed no glycogen increase in their study, but they had a physiological oral carbohydrate intake compared to the glycogen clamp or the glucose clamp. So that's a key difference here. And they were also including protein with this study. So protein and carb and a ketone. The protein's great, and it's important because what this study found was that the ketone monoester promotes mTOR. And mTOR, hopefully we know by now, that it increases muscle protein synthesis, helps muscle repair, and all the downstream effects through there. So mTOR is a really important aspect when we're talking about the benefits of sports performance and recovery. So we want that muscle to be recovering quickly. So that's great. So again, the inclusion of proteins together with carbs and a ketone ester, they found that the combination increased that mTOR activation substantially. And this is in line with previous work that they've shown in vitro, where they saw an increase in PS6K1 and 4E-BP1, which are both markers looking at muscle protein synthesis, so how much muscle we're laying down. And another nice benefit of this is that the ketone bodies have also previously shown to decrease proteolysis, especially in starvation. So it's decreased protein breakdown. So not only are we getting a benefit of increasing muscle protein synthesis, but we're also reducing the breakdown. So we're going to get a great additive effect on that. And all the guys in the KetoGains group, many years ago, they've known this for ages. They've been using keto to get really good gains in the gym. And they've found that even through hypocaloric states or during fasting and cutting, they're still able to really maintain their muscle mass. So again, as an athlete, if you need to make weight, you need to stay lean, this is a great benefit. And they talk about how some of the benefits seem to be derived because it is altering the AMPK activation, thereby allowing an increase in protein synthesis. So if we've got too much AMPK, it's telling us that we don't have enough energy, right? It's a sensor of energy balance. And when that energy balance, the body determines we have enough, it therefore allows you to go into muscle protein synthesis and build muscle. So the addition of ketones seems to shift the needle much quicker to allow us to have that positive energy balance, which is fantastic. Lastly, we look at the last study from Poff et al. 2019. And again, these were all male-trained athletes. They show as well that it may play a role in preventing overreaching symptoms and even help athletes improve performance. So they saw an objective improvement in performance, but they also saw an improvement in symptoms of overreaching. So fatigue, performance degradations, mood and changes, those types of things. And as you can see, so they increased their overall work output and endurance performance by 15% compared to the control group, which is excellent. And just like the previous study, they didn't see any difference in glycogen resynthesis. Again, it was physiological doses of carbs, and they also had protein in their study. So it seems to not necessarily reach that same level as the first study that they reviewed, but it also doesn't seem to have a negative effect. So that's important. We're not affecting glycogen or glucose uptake, but we're still seeing improvements in mTOR, still seeing improvements in recovery and performance and all of those. So net positive, I would say, across all of these. And again, they're talking about the activation of mTOR, and they're saying we could get the mechanism they're talking about here is potentially affecting the glycogen resynthesis. So when we have mTOR activated, we get phosphorylation of the insulin receptor substrate 1, which is going to promote its degradation. And this is a receptor that helps get insulin out. So if we degrade that receptor, we're not going to get the same response of insulin. Therefore, it's going to blunt the full response, and we're not going to get as much glucose uptake or glycogen accumulation. It's really, the glycogen aspect is probably more important for people who need to do repeated bouts of exercise or people doing really long bouts of endurance, marathons, ultra marathons. But if you're just doing one bout of exercise and you've got 20 to 24 hours of recovery, you can have a normal meal, have some carbs, most of your glycogen will be restored in that time. But if you do have consecutive ones, that's where we need to be more mindful of your glycogen stores. And here, again, they outline. So the benefit is it does not negatively impact glycogen resynthesis, but still augments protein synthesis and repair. So that's a key part for sure. Another interesting thing they looked at, remember we talked about the central aspects of fatigue, looking at ammonia. One other one is actually 5-HT. So during exercise, we get an increase in tryptophan. That tryptophan converts to 5-HT and contributes to central fatigue. Ketones seem to increase free fatty acids. The free fatty acids competes for binding to albumin with tryptophan. So when we see a decrease in that free fatty acid, more of the tryptophan can be bound to albumin, therefore reducing that central fatigue component. So again, that's where we're getting a little bit of the theory, perhaps, of how that can help on that side. So overall, they can say that we can conclude that ketone monoesters, when taken together with glucose only, may increase insulin secretion, glucose uptake, and or glycogen synthesis, while a ketone monoester taken with protein, especially containing leucine, which we know is highly anabolic, and glucose, doesn't change glycogen synthesis, but instead activates mTOR and its targets to upregulate protein synthesis or muscle protein synthesis. So overall, we're getting, I think, a net positive as far as recovery, but you can tweak this a little bit, as I said, depending on the types of activity or performance that you need. So if you do have multiple bouts of activity or gains, anything like that in the same day, then you're going to do just potentially glycogen with ketones only. But if you've got time for glycogen stores to be restored through 24 hours, then it looks like you're potentially going to get more benefit out of just doing the protein and glycogen and in physiological manners. On top of that, there are a lot of other potential benefits of using ketones. We see potential aspects of longevity because they are an HDAC inhibitor. And if you haven't really learned about that much, looking at ketone bodies as signaling metabolites, this paper is great. So they do talk about how these play a role as an HDAC inhibitor specifically, which can play a role in longevity and healthy aging. So there are lots of potential benefits. Plus, we talked about potentially reducing oxidative stress and a host of other things. So it seems to be some really good benefits for using ketones for performance. They do talk about a couple other things you may want to look at stacking. If you haven't tried sodium bicarbonate, you could look at doing that. I would caution you because it can go terribly wrong and cause a lot of digestive distress. But if you're used to it and you already have a protocol that works for you, adding sodium bicarbonate might actually help a little bit because it reduces a bit of that acid load created by the ketone monoesters. That's something to stack on top. But still, a lot more research has to be done. Now, if you want to give this a try, what they've determined through these studies here is most of them, they're looking at they usually hit about 2.5 to 5 millimolars of BHB, but in general, there seems to be a threshold here of about 1 to 3 millimolar. So as I said, this study and a lot of these studies are using ketone esters, but you can still use salts. But the aim is to really just get you up to that 1 to 3 millimolars of BHB. So if you've got a stick at home, you can try using that. Just like your glucose measure, you can get the same things for ketones. Try to measure and see how you go there. Of course, not medical advice. This is just for education purposes only. If you want to play around, maybe if you are using ketones, put a comment down below. Let me know how you're going with using ketones, if you played around with exogenous ketones. What I'm doing right now, I use them for both pre-workout and post-workout, and I'm playing around with what I need to use post-workout at the moment. I've used salt and an ester, and I'm just measuring to see where I get. So between 30 to 60 minutes post-ingestion, you should be aiming for that 1 to 3 millimolars through there. So that's about it. So it seems to be, as I said, some really good benefits of using exogenous ketones for performance. The literature is still a bit fresh on maybe using it as a pre-workout, but post-workout, it seems to be that there are some really good benefits across there as an ergogenic aid. So if you're trying it out, let me know how you go. Otherwise, we'll see you in the next one.